All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Family Movie Time podcast. I'm Jeff Giordano, your host. I'm really excited, thankful, grateful to have Estelle as my guest today for this episode. We're going to cover the movie The Miracle Worker from 1962. And we'll just get right into it. I'll let you introduce yourself. Estelle, you got the mic.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Estelle Piper. I might be best known as the Taste the Biscuit Lady. If you've heard that song, it's kind of hard not to hear it these days. But I met Vincent Gargiulo, who directed that 14 years ago. Tom Shaw and I were cast, and then we've had a little bit of virality, but about 2 years ago, it just went boom. So that's been very interesting, a little life-changing. But I really, my theater, I have a background in theater from like when I was little. I wrote plays, I put them on in the garage, the backyard, school. And then I began to take classes as I got older. Went through a couple periods where I'd pull out of theater for a while and do something else, but I've pretty much been acting, directing, teaching most of my life, and then doing some camera work. And I love to paint and dance, and uh, went back to writing again during pandemic. So when Jeff mentioned his list of films, I came up with about six. Then I thought, I'd love to talk about these. And for me, the Miracle Worker was something that touched me as a kid. It was a big moment to see that, and reviewing that, rewatching that was um, interesting for the mind, but a real journey for the heart and the soul, I think, to be honest.
Wow. I will confess I had not seen the film. I put it on the list of now the list is like 630 movies,
Oh, I know.
but I hadn't watched it yet. I was waiting for somebody to like pick it out of the list and want to discuss it. So I was glad that you selected it. And then when I saw it just last week,
Yeah.
I was really I didn't know what to expect. I didn't read anything about it. I
Yeah.
just knew it was about based on Helen Keller's life. I didn't even know
Oh, so you hadn't seen it yet?
I didn't even know what portion of her life it was going to cover. It was going to be like,
Oh my God.
her whatever, adulthood, childhood. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
I just went into it just kind of without researching the movie itself. So
Fresh. That's
that
great.
was like kind of surreal, but I enjoyed that experience of it. I recommend sometimes for people to do that with certain movies. Don't read reviews or even,
Yeah. Yeah.
ask people what they think of the movie. You see it first, then you could talk about it, research it, look up the trivia and whatnot. So
Yeah.
yeah, for me it hit on a personal level because I worked for 15 years in special education in public schools.
Hmm.
If I include the East Coast and the West Coast, from elementary, middle school, high school levels, all public schools over the years as a paraeducator, instructional aide, teaching assistant, whatever your school district would, uh,
Yep.
define the
Yep.
role as. But yeah, like I've worked with kids who were very severe and who would throw things or break things or spit or kick or verbally threaten. So watching the movie, The Miracle Worker, it reminded me of some of that behavior.
Hmm.
I hadn't worked with any students that were like deaf blind, but to have that kind of hostility and that kind of energy, basically like it's like a violent energy too.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I was like, whoa! It kind of made me think of experiences, and then just seeing, you know, the teacher work with her and
Yeah.
really just try to figure out a way to relate and try to find a way to help her learn to communicate. And I mean, it was such an experience seeing that. I mean, to see it in the theater. Did you see it in the theater years ago when it came out?
Yeah, we went to the drive-in movies a lot when I was a kid, and that was where I saw it. Yeah, and I have seen. bits and pieces of it. It was on actually like TCM or something a week or two ago. So we came in on part of it. Um, and of course, I had no idea, that was before you asked me about the podcast. So I was like, oh, I should have watched the whole thing. But but I did today, and it's quite a journey. I mean, there's a part of me that has worked on stage, and it was adapted from the stage play. So there are moments where I go, oh, okay, I can see where that moment was on stage. But then, adapting it to film and that fight or struggle, there's several, but the really big one, around the dining table,
Yeah,
the filming of that, can you imagine?
yeah,
Oh my God. And I was, you mentioned that you had worked with some kids who had different ability levels, and I am reminded of a couple of friends of mine. It's not exactly the same, and I'm not making any general statements about autism, but um, both of them have autistic children who have been very violent with them,
wow,
very violent. And and I'd see marks on them and I'd go, but it actually, the beginning of it is so, there's conflict and argument and shouting and and Helen's running wild, and that wasn't my childhood, but there was a lot of chaos and a lot of violence in my childhood. So it was like, oh yeah, I forgot about all that, in the movie. um but that journey that they take together.
yeah,
Plus, the family. I mean, it does beg the question of who is really blind and deaf. I mean, she wants to learn, and there's one of the first shots of her once she begins to be a kid, no longer a baby. It's a great shot. It's through the grass of like a meadow, and she's walking with her hands, just reaching for anything, and her mother is, coming up behind her. And it was such a great, brilliant image of her in the world. Like, here I am out in the middle of nowhere. What's out there? But as Annie, the teacher, begins to work with Helen, varying degrees of success, not linear progress, and the parents, they're shocked, they're horrified, and she accuses them of pitying her and spoiling her and not preparing her for reality and not letting her experience reality. And you wonder, how blind are they? How deaf are they? On another level.
yeah.
So there's some really wonderful kind of juxtapositions that go on in that film.
So you saw it at a drive-in as a kid. Do you remember how old you were?
Well, let's see. I think it came out in 62, so I would have been 9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then through the years, you would catch it on TV
Yeah, a
or,
little bit here and there. And I saw it a couple times on stage, various theaters, because I've done theater most of my adult life. And so various, theaters would do it and I would watch it, and you know, kind of re-experience it. And it's different in the stage version. I mean, one, the real people are right there. But different people are going to treat it differently, as a theatrical production. So it kind of also had a special place in my heart because in high school and college years, I think I mentioned this earlier, I loved that story and I wanted to audition, but I was going through a lack of confidence at that point. So I didn't audition for either role, and I would have, oh my God, loved to have done that. But I still love it, and it's, I gave up kicking myself in the butt over it and kind of went, you know, directed.
is the play still, is it still a popular play that is still produced these days in the theater world from your
Well,
perspective?
I think the last time I saw it probably was about 20 years ago, but it does come up now and again. And I was wondering how dated it would be, but it's set in a different time period, so there's kind of a period with different mores and different expectations and all of that. Um, and it is a costume play, costume period. So depending on the budget of the theater, that may or may not influence their production. Um, but yeah, it is one of those kind of reliable chestnuts, if you will, in dramas, family drama that people go, "Oh, I love that story. I want to go see it, or I want to go audition for it." So oddly enough, yes, I think because it's pretty archetypal in its way. You've got this child with seemingly unsurmountable um, obstacles and limitations, and a teacher who's been through some of that and has actually, Annie Sullivan lived in the asylums and whatnot. She grew up there, and it was rough. And then you've got this genteel Southern family, with this wild child on their hands. And when she becomes a little, as Annie would say, housebroken, she will eat with a spoon at the table and fold her napkin, and she's clean and she dresses herself. And they're like, that's enough. That's beyond what we wanted. And Annie's like, no, no, if she could just, and there's a great quote from it. I'm going to paraphrase it, but she says, if I could just get her to understand one word, in sign language, I could hand her the world. It's not enough for her to obey, for to obey blindly is as bad as being disabled. It's as bad as being, unaware and unconscious. She goes, I want her to obey consciously because it's a choice. And so the breakthrough moment is just like, oh my God, so good. It's
Did,
inspiring.
did you know that originally the film studio wanted to cast Elizabeth Taylor or Audrey Hepburn in the role of Annie Sullivan?
Whoa, whoa. Well, we know from Virginia Woolf that Elizabeth Taylor can get down.
Yeah.
And I think Audrey Hepburn, she was tougher than she looked, and she would have been a very compassionate, I think, Annie. But it'd be very interesting to see her, take the reins on, the grittier parts. I'm, yeah, I have a feeling, Anne Bancroft hadn't done a lot of films at that point. And actually, as a child actress, because I quickly looked up their filmography, Patty Duke had done child roles in a number of films before that. And so I would imagine Anne Bancroft was kind of an unknown or untested entity, but she's just, as she proved later in her career, is a wonderful actress. I keep thinking of her and Mel Brooks together
Oh, yeah.
because he said, what is a beautiful talented woman like that doing with a schlub like me? And I love this. She said, I couldn't wait for him. I can't wait for him to get home, at the end of the day, because then I know that's when the party starts. I love that.
Wow.
But yeah, Anne Bancroft. And I had no idea about, Liz Taylor or
Yeah, the
Audrey Hepburn.
story the story is that so United Artists was the studio that produced the movie.
Oh yeah.
They offered a $2 million budget if writer William Gibson and the director Arthur Penn would cast either Elizabeth Taylor or Audrey Hepburn in the role of Annie Sullivan. And
Wow.
then Arthur Penn and Gibson insisted that the part be basically recreated by Anne Bancroft, who was already a Tony Award winning actress.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah.
So the studio said, okay, okay, you can cast Anne Bancroft, but we're going to cut the budget
Ah.
to the budget's going to now go from 2 million to 1.5 million.
Oh,
And $200,000 was spent purchasing the rights to the play.
wow. Wow.
So that was pretty interesting, like just researching the movie. Um, and then I didn't know with Helen Keller's life, Mark Twain was a friend of hers.
I did not know that either.
And Mark
Yes, so.
Twain, the legend is Mark Twain referred to Anne Sullivan as the miracle worker.
Oh my God.
So they kept that for the title of the movie.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Have
Wow.
you have you read a lot about Helen Keller's life or anything she's
Some,
written?
yeah, not in any great degree, but some, yeah. And I've certainly seen, some of her quotes and things which are spot on.
Yeah, just looking up her biography, campaigned for people with disabilities, women's suffrage, labor rights, world peace, wrote, like 14 books, hundreds of speeches and essays on topics ranging from animals to Gandhi.
Wow.
She was a founding member of the American Civil Liberties Union. She did earn a degree as well. She was
Yeah.
one of the first, or she's credited as the first deaf-blind person in the U.S. to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree.
Wow.
So, and she lived to be like quite old. She was 87 years old.
Yeah.
Um,
Amazing that that person met the right person to bring her out of that silence, if you will.
yeah.
I mean, what we would have missed if not.
And with the movie, as you see clips or if you see the whole thing now as an adult, how does how does the film resonate with you as an adult?
Ah, well, I noticed the mores and the customs, not only of a Southern family at that time, but, the perceptions of people at that time. I remember I had a brother that back in the 60s, when we were both about 8 or 10, and on, uh, one of my brothers was what we call retarded. We call him learning disabled at this point. And I think he was probably undiagnosed autistic as well. And I remember him asking my parents, we were driving somewhere. I had two younger brothers, my parents and I were in the car. And he said something about wanting to get married. And they said, "No, Harry, you can't get married." And he went, "Why?" And they said, "Because you're retarded. You can't get married." Now, as we all got older, he ended up in a pretty good group home. And there were couples actually within that. It was a pretty good sized group home and it was well run. And it was in a variety of houses and stuff. And there were couples who got to live together. I mean, they had a little supervision, but they got to live together. So, but the whole thing was, you know, uh, the idea of asylums was still around when we were kids. The idea that, um, someone who is disabled had no other potential. Um, and some pretty archaic ideas that seep into the script about women as well. Annie Sullivan is a working woman. However, Mrs. Keller, Helen's mother, is not a working woman. Her place is in the home, and there are black servants, which aren't on screen a lot, and there's not a lot of stereotyping. Um, but there's one scene where Annie has convinced the Keller family to let her be with Helen for 2 weeks in a little cottage on the property, so she can only work with her. And she also asks that one of the servants' kids, I want to say Percy, also is there, and he sleeps in another room. And she calls him in one night, and there's an episode with spelling, and she will only talk. Annie will only talk to Percy, which makes Helen jealous and jealous. And he finally connects with Helen instead of pushing her away. And at some point, Annie says, "Percy, you can go back to bed now." And he gets up and she goes, "Thank you." That was probably the most human moment, between the two races in that film. Otherwise, they were just sort of, they'd come in and take the baby or do this and that. And so, all of that stuff, you kind of go, okay, reflection of the times. Um, but I expected it to be more dated when I rewatched it today, and it still stands up pretty well. Um, there are some moments where they hold for a second, and I can almost see the stage production where they would have held, as the lights dim and then go to the next scene or act. Um, but that that first struggle, physical struggle in the dining room between Annie and Helen, I mean, there are different takes, so it wasn't one take, but that's just exhausting to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, how did they rehearse that? How did they film that? I mean, I know it's done. Um, and when I was younger, I would have loved to do it, but yeah, it's quite the marathon. But I remember a lot of violence and a lot of crazy stuff from when I was young. And that kind of thing was, I won't say accepted, but if things like that happened, let's say in a family, you never talked about it back then. You just swept it under the rug and you just, you didn't bring it up. And so it really brought up a lot for me just to watch all that and to watch Annie's character insist on, confronting in a way this girl to bring her out of um, that isolation that she's in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to keep her from being a tyrant at the same time.
Because I imagine if a family back then had a child with the similar condition or the same condition, they
Mhm.
probably would have put the kid in like an asylum or institution or a home of some kind.
They could have, yeah. And depending on the family, especially if they have any kind of social standing or anything like that, yeah, then yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit about Helen Keller's family. Her father served as a captain in the Confederate Army.
Hmm.
Family was part of a slave-holding elite before the
Yep.
American Civil War.
Yep.
Lost status later, and her mother was the daughter of Charles W. Adams, a Confederate general.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And here comes this Irish Yankee girl into their home to deal with their daughter. Interesting.
And there's a quote from the first autobiography by Helen Keller. There is no king who has not had a slave among his ancestors, and no slave who has not had a king among his.
Hmm. That's a great quote.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think in the movie, it's like the director's Arthur Penn, who will go on to do Bonnie and Clyde, probably maybe his most famous movie. I feel like The Miracle Worker, I don't hear it brought up
Mm-mm.
much anymore. I mean,
Mm-mm.
maybe it's on lists, like that you could, read in film books or film studies books, but, just talking about cinema, film history, I don't hear it brought up very often.
No, and as you're saying that, this is the first time this thought occurred to me. Really, the primary characters in that movie are all female. And that's not something that was particularly popular in 1962. And it might still not be today, you know. And it's it's can be considered a family drama. Some people are gonna go, well, it doesn't have any world resonance. And you have to kind of go, wait a minute. There are a lot of analogies or metaphors. There's a lot of parallels in it. Um, I think maybe just before this we were talking about the relative blindness and deafness of the family. They're blind to what they're doing to Helen and how they're helping to keep her crippled. And they are deaf to Annie's requirements and her pleas to allow Helen to enter the world and become humanized, not civilized, maybe socialized, but in order to give her tools to function, at whatever level she's capable of, which turned out to be quite high. Um, it is something from mid-century, that may be part of it. And maybe people go, oh yeah, it's about Helen Keller, very inspiring family picture. But on rewatching it, I went, it's good stuff. Yeah. And, especially on Patty Duke's and Bancroft's part, really incredible performances.
And you mentioned Patty Duke. She did win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for the movie.
Yeah.
She was the youngest to win an Academy Award at the time, and then um, the record would be only for 11 years. She would hold that record, being the youngest, until Tatum O'Neal broke the record in 1974 for
Paper Moon?
Paper Moon.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Amazing.
Um, Now you've taught theater as well over the years.
Yeah, I pretty much have taught acting, and that can be regular acting class, but it incorporates voice and articulation and movement and character building and improvisation and whatnot. But yeah, yeah,
Wow.
um, it's uh, it's always great to teach because you're gonna, well, and they say this in the movie several different ways. Um, when you teach, you are going to have to learn. You will have much to learn. And she says at one point, Annie, I think it's Jimmy who plays Helen's half brother. And there's several interesting parallels. Annie Sullivan's character had a younger brother named Jimmy who died in the asylum. And then, Helen has this half brother who's kind of a smart ass, but he's the one who really agrees with her towards the end. But he does taunt her mercilessly throughout that. But I made a couple of quick notes here. Um, yeah. And I've forgotten your question now. You'll have to remind me. I'm sorry, I got off on that tangent for a second.
It's okay. As an educator, as a teacher,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
have you taught different age groups as well?
Yeah.
Adults, young
Yeah. Anywhere
people?
from toddlers, literally, to, seniors, going up to at least mid 80s.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's been a trip. Up until this last year, I'd spent the previous 10 years teaching after school acting classes to grades kindergarten through fifth, which is, if you think about that age range, those sets of skills, abilities, and attention spans are quite different. And post-pandemic, post-pandemic kids, they're kind of wild. I mean, that 2-year break did not do a whole lot of kids a big favor. To come back to a class and, just why should I do this? Why should I do that? Um, so it's very interesting watching how that's progressing since pandemic. But it's been fascinating, and I gotta say, one of the moments that I love, probably everybody does, as a teacher or a director, is when, whether it's a 17-year-old kid or a 70-year-old adult, that moment when not only the light turns on and they get it, but they're in the moment doing their role and they blossom right before your eyes and they do something they didn't know they could do and nobody else has seen them do. And you're like, I got to be part of that. I got to watch it, you know? Um, so that's actually been pretty interesting. That's a big payoff emotionally, for directing and teaching. And so from that standpoint, when I watch Annie and Helen, in these scenes, and Helen or Annie finally kind of gets that payoff, and yet it's rueful, and you kind of go, wow, it's joyful, and yet, because there's so much that she went through to get to that point. And before she even met Helen, her life was a struggle. And you see her after, it's getting towards the end, and she still has to pour out the medicine and hold it to her eyes because she's practically blind herself. So you just go, phew. She
Wow.
says at one point, I'm not the only one. Helen's asleep. And she says, I'm not the only one who needs a teacher. I I need a teacher. How do I reach you? And there are those moments, in teaching where you go, I don't know what to do now, you know.
I imagine with your teaching experience, there's a lot to say for like social emotional learning.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the way, you're going to wear this costume, you're going to wear these kind of clothes, and like how that psychologically affects especially a young person or an adult, and
Hmm.
you're going to play this kind of role or this kind of personality.
Hmm.
There seems to be, so much to learn for young people, especially like someone else's perspective.
Hmm.
It's not like your own lived in, experience. Is there
And
any,
yet,
is there anything, yeah, you would say about that?
yeah, it can kind of go in either direction, the discipline for some kids, it's like they already know it. They come in, they give you a beautiful reading, their heart's in it, they're delighted to do, the costumes and all that, and it's like you go, okay, this ain't the first life you've acted. And there's others who go, I have to know my lines today. And I'm like, oh, we've been talking about it for 3 weeks, or whatever it is. And yet, trying to think who it was. Uh, it's a pretty famous actress. And she was saying, acting is within, no, it hasn't come back to me. Anyway, she's saying acting is in all of us in a way. It was Kathy Bates in a very short clip. And she said, when we're children, we play at everything. And that's the word play. It's called a screen play. The production is called a play. And kids will use their imaginations right on the spot. And when you can get that, yeah, and that's part of, I mean, you want kids to learn to be team players and to self-initiate, but to also cooperate with each other and to listen and to focus and to memorize their lines and their blocking and then be spontaneous with it, right? But she said there's a sense that we had that as kids, and that still should be in our lives. And I remember my dance teacher saying, you can organize and be an organizer, or you can improvise and be an improviser with your life. And he said the best is to do both. And I went, thank you. But with kids, uh, I think the hardest thing for after school was that some of the kids just didn't want to be there. And I don't blame them. That wasn't their thing. Their parents signed them up, and especially post-pandemic, I got to say, there's a lot of parents who are either working from home or they just need one more hour without the kids. And so they throw them into these classes after school. It's not a totally bad idea, but the kids are like, I don't want to be here. I don't give a shit what you say. Okay, here we go. And I try to respect that and try to ask the kids, who really wants to be here? Whose parents signed them up? And you're all right with that. How many of you did not want to be here? So that I just say, give it your best shot. Let's have fun. We can have fun or not have fun. I prefer to have fun. Um, and I've directed high school kids and stuff, and some of them had almost no experience. Others were like already beautiful little actors and singers, that would just raise chills, on your back when they would sing or speak, and you're like, oh my God, wow. So, this whole dynamic of teaching and learning, a lot of people say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And it sure seems that way with Helen. But the reverse is true too. When the teacher is ready, the student will appear. And that first meeting between Annie and Helen, is just very interesting. Um, for some reason, I'm thinking of, some of there's some quick notes I wrote down while I was watching it. And um, Annie, I think, reads something that says, "Is the life of a soul of less import than the body?" And um, Helen's playing with a cracked egg, and there's a little chick inside that is, trying to get its way out. And she says, "Helen, the chick has to come out of its shell sometime, and you will too." Um, yeah, I'm just looking at, and there were some interesting things in the movie itself where, where Helen wants her doll to have eyes, and her mother's like, "Oh my God, she wants her doll to have eyes." And then Annie shows up. But there's a scene where they're first in that cottage together by themselves, and they're both sleeping, and they both have their left hand, at least as far as we can tell, stretched out. Helen is on the bed and she's sleeping, and her left arm is out. And Annie is in like a rocking chair, and she's sleeping, and she's dreaming of her brother, and what he went through in the asylum. And her left hand goes out. And there's these wonderful images and parallels in there where you see these souls that are at different levels of development or seeming, development. Uh, let's see. Oh yeah, and the Mockingbird theme, she sings to her, I think, at one point. Um, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring and all that, and then you can hear it in the music. They will play variations on it depending on the mood, currently. And then of course it's there at the end too. Um, and so it's interesting, there was some good artistry, on that film.
How would you describe, from your experience teaching and performing yourself, what is the difference between acting in a play and acting in a film? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I would say so. And that's actually one of the things I ask students, these kids really. And first of all, I go, what is different between a film or TV and a live theater show where you are there with the actors? And, the older kids for sure will say, well, one, you can edit, you can call cut, you can do this, you can do that. And the other, is live. And if they do great, you see it. And if they make a mistake, you see it. Um, Somebody told me decades ago, they said, in stage, you need to have a radiating kind of energy. You have to reach that last row, at least. Whereas in film, you are almost like drawing it in like a sponge. And that's why, if your inner life is going on as a character, not to lean towards any particular school of acting learning, but it will be picked up, by the camera. And you want to pull people in. I remember doing a couple episodes for a series on Investigation Discovery Channel. Like I almost got away with it, and playing my first victim of crime on that. Um, I thought I was doing the scene just fine, and the director stopped me and he goes, "Have you done stage acting?" And I went, "Uh-oh." He was like, "Just dial it down a little." Okay. So, there is that. It's important to have an inner life as a character on stage, but it's just got to be radiated out much more. And movements have to be bigger, generally, depending on your venue. But that inner life of the character and not having to indicate or broadcast it, just let it be. Um, I've I've been told, and I would have to say probably it's true, it may be easier for stage actors to adapt to film than film actors who've had no experience to adapt to stage. Um, but that's one take on it.
On the topic of teachers that you've had over the years, do
Mm.
you remember any teachers that were more impactful or memorable?
Yeah, I do. Um, I had a teacher, all of them really. I mean, I had two or three in high school. And one of them, he's long gone now. His name is Eugene Levy. Is it Eugene? I think so. Maybe that's the actor I'm thinking of, but his last name was Levy, Don Levy. And he was actually a friend of Sam Peckinpah's. And he had played small parts in Sam Peckinpah films. He helped write scripts with him. But he was a wonderful acting teacher at Lodi High School back in the day. And he was my creative writing teacher. And I just adored him. I think another really important person was Jim Kirkwood, who had an exceptionally loyal following at Diablo Valley College, which is a junior college. But to this day, the Jim Kirkwood page on Facebook, when it comes around to his birthday, all these people get on and go, that guy, that guy. Um, and then I got to be honest, there were others that were wonderful, and I so appreciated the chances they gave me. Um, my dance teacher was a professional dancer on Broadway and in a few films. Um, but he turned out to be a hell of a coach at a time when I needed to, up my game, be a more effective teacher, and director. And I'm pretty much forever grateful to all of those people. If I ever pick up an award, I'll be like, I love you.
In regards to, you mentioned the like, post-pandemic learning at this point.
Oh yeah.
What advice would you give to educators and teachers out there to, reach kids better in the classroom or to teach them better? What could you
Hmm.
what could you say about that?
Well, one, acknowledge, I think, to the kids. And then we used to do like these 10-week classes generally. Um, and at the end, we would have a presentation, a show, scenes, and we'd show off some of the skills we had for the parents. And I would bring it up to the kids at the beginning or at some point close to the beginning. I would bring it up during the presentation to the parents and go, we've been through something for 2 years, three, whatever. And it's had a profound effect that we probably don't even know or understand yet on all of us. It has certainly affected the kids, and the parents get very quiet at that point. But, how can we turn that into a win-win? And years ago, I taught summer camp at Galileo, which is a very ambitious summer camp program. And I saw a young woman, much younger than myself, that I learned a lot from that summer. One of the things she did was enter into a verbal contract with the kids, and it's something I've adopted. So in the first session or two, I go, if we're all talking, it's simple, if we're all talking at the same time, can we really understand each other? And the kids go, no. And the older kids kind of go, no, like I know what's coming now. And they're right, and I go, okay, so can we agree that only one person's going to talk at a time? And you're going to raise your hand and I will call on you. That way we all get to be heard, whatever, whatever. Um, and I do things even before pandemic where I say, look, if your best friend or your sibling is in class and you guys have a good time together, that's great. But if I find that you cannot focus while you two are together, I'm going to separate you. Doesn't mean I hate you, doesn't mean I'm angry. It just means what? And I try to ask them so that they own the answer to it. And they go, we need to pay attention. I'm like, yeah, why? And they're like, because we could miss something. I'm like, and it's more fun that way. So I try to find ways to involve them. I also do this thing, which seems to be even more important after pandemic. Kids have been usually sitting in a classroom and it's like, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. So if I remember, I do a thing I call 5-second freestyle. When they come in, we take and roll, and I try to make it fun. I go, today during roll call, I need you to make an alien noise, or another day it's an animal, it's a mechanical. And so I think the trick for me is to keep them on their toes because they keep me on my toes and get them used to, we don't know what's going to happen today. We know some things, but we don't know. So we have to pay attention. And so the 5 second freestyle, everybody sits in a line or a circle, and I call them up one at a time. And in the middle of the room, they have 5 seconds to do whatever they want for maybe the first time that day. They can pretend to be asleep. They can be a cat. They can be a ninja crazy warrior. They can be fire, or Captain Marvel, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I had one class where we had about four really different kids, and they all wanted to be homicidal maniacs. So I was like, okay, these are your 5 seconds, do it. I was thinking, good that we have an outlet for this energy. But it it changes the dynamic of the class because the kids, even if they want to do nothing, they just stand, even if they're like looking at me like, you know, they're allowed to do that, so that you get some of that energy out. And then I try to see what they respond to. And some will respond to more gentle, sensitive or even feminine kind of things. And it doesn't matter the gender, really. Others will respond to very combative, active, kinds of things. So I try to include games like that. And different classes, I have something called Story Story that I picked up from improv, where we tell a story one word at a time. Some classes love that. Sometimes kindergartners are amazing at that. Other classes are like, you know, so I find out what they respond to. And you know, I was given large classes by myself, so I was like, okay, we're going to do multiple per character scenes here, and try to help them find something they really like, So keeping in mind the time limits we've got. I mean, I have an hour class, so we have to move. If I've got 25 kids in an hour, you know, we have to bunch them in groups, and I have to really keep pushing forward. And I constantly find ways to catch their attention. And I think, okay, great. Maybe we can go along for a minute, maybe for 5 minutes, on a theme or an idea. And we do things like vocal exercises and stuff, but I try to find a way to make it fun or to make them understand that it's important. Because I may get up and not mimicking anybody in particular, but I may go, they go, we can't hear you. And I'm like, right. So what do I need to do? Let them figure the answers out, right? So it's a constant. I think the biggest thing post-pandemic is the increasing number of disruptive kids. Used to be one or two. Sometimes it can be a third to half the class. And you're like, whoa. And sometimes I have to call their bluff and go, you know what? We don't have to do this. I can dismiss you to your parents. I can go home. I can go do other things. And sometimes they go, oh, no, no. And other times they go, that's fine. I'm like, all right, great. There's the door.
How
I
did
go to the wall for this.
how did you, since we have a little bit of time left, how did you discover your, deeper interest or passion for the arts as a younger person? Do you remember the class or
Ugh.
whatever the type of artistic expression it was, where you were like, I kind of feel like I can express myself, or I feel comfortable doing this. I want to do it for fun, not just for a class.
Yeah, that's a very good question. My dad had been a singer. He sang in some musicals and in college and stuff. He sang in nightclubs when he was a young man. My mom had been an actress. She had played, now this gets into a whole nother thing. She had played Medea, and I got to tell you, the pictures of her as Medea scared the living daylights out of us kids. I mean, if you can imagine the insecurity of being a child of Medea. Ah! So anyway, that's a whole other thing. I really want to write this book, Daughter of Medea, because we never hear about any daughters that she had. And I'm a little inspired by C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces, which is a modern retelling or a retelling of the Cupid Psyche myth from this viewpoint of one of the stepsisters. or the sisters, half sisters. So I sort of, it came to mind. I went, okay, the two boys die when Jason runs off and wants to marry Creusa, right? But what if there was a daughter? And because she was a daughter, even though, Medea was very powerful, a very powerful sorceress, she just wasn't that important. We'll marry her off or we'll do whatever. But when it comes to revenge on Jason, the boys are gone. What would it have been like to be a daughter of Medea coming up through all that and then in the aftermath? To me, that's a fascinating play. But the moments, I guess, were that we went to the movies a lot. That was one of the things my parents could agree on. Um, we were given a lot of books. We were supposed to sit in our rooms and be quiet and read. And so that works out real well. Anyway, and I think I was 5 when there was an assembly, and I was in kindergarten. There was an assembly at school. We were going to be standing on risers and singing Christmas carols. And the teacher said the girls are allowed to wear lipstick. So I went home like, and so that, and my parents were livid afterwards because I kept turning. I was so thrilled if we were lipstick. I guess that was the beginning of makeup, right? So apparently I kept turning to people and going, is my lipstick still on? Can you see my lipstick? Is my lipstick still on? And my parents were like, what were you talking about? Up there. And then at age 7, second grade, there was again another Christmas program, and there were 4 second grade classes, I guess. And this was in St. Louis and at Larimore Elementary. And so our class was going to sing carols from the USA, and others were going to sing them from France and from England and maybe Germany. I don't know what. And there was a person from each class who was supposed to be like the MC. And I don't know if you remember this, but they used to be like mimeograph, and it was a purple ink. And when they ran the stuff off, you could smell it. It was a very unique smell. So we were given a page of material, and I could swear to this day, they said, please memorize this so you can perform it for your class. So we did, of course. And then the night came, and everybody's got their piece of paper in their hand. I went, didn't you guys memorize this? And they're like, we didn't have to memorize this. I'm like, yes, we did. So I go to the teacher. She goes, oh, did you memorize it? And I'm like, oh, who are these people? So somewhere in there, and then one teacher, 5th grade, I think, she really encouraged us to write creatively, stories and all kinds of stuff, as well as plays. So we put little playlets on in her class. And I was delighted to do that. So that's a long answer, but there we are.
No, that was beautiful, Estelle. I enjoyed the answer. Regarding family friendly movies, especially the live action type,
Mm.
is there any that you watched as a kid or with your family over the years, or that you watch around the holidays, even that are, group viewings? Is there any that you could mention?
Wow, that's a very good question. I mean, I uh, will check in on The Wizard of Oz, some years. Um, there are there's something from, I think it goes back to the 80s or 90s, and I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it had 4 kangaroos that were like spirit warriors. And it was like kangaroo warriors of virtue, warriors of virtue. And it was about this boy who is disabled. He has a brace or something, I think, on his leg. And somehow he slips through his imagination into this other world. And these 4 different kangaroo warriors of virtue, and you could get the toys at one of the fast food places, and I did as an adult. And Angus McFadden, who's a very interesting actor that doesn't get a lot of work, that I can tell, was kind of this fascinating, evil, but not entirely evil sorcerer. And I thought it was a fabulous movie. It's a little obscure, but I think it's worth looking up. I'll probably think of about 10 of them as soon as we sign off. Are there any that appeal to you or that you revisit?
Wizard of Oz is up there for me.
Yeah,
I did not grow up watching a lot of Disney movies.
me neither.
I have, gone through, especially during the pandemic. That's kind of, I think, subconsciously, I started watching more family-friendly movies during the pandemic or Disney movies, and
Yeah.
the animated ones that I had missed, um, and then the live action ones, and then even going through the like made-for-TV Disney movies too. Like, so
Hmm.
there's some real gems there. But from my own childhood, adolescence, younger years, Wizard of Oz, and I even remember syncing up Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon
Wow.
and watching it with a friend of mine because there was this. Now you can find the movie already in sync to the soundtrack,
I
but I
didn't
did it
know
from
that.
I did it from CD
Oh my,
where I like start. I think it's on like the third lion's roar at the MGM logo in the beginning of the movie. Is
yeah.
press play, and then you have to like because the
Oh my God.
album's only like 40 something minutes. You got to like play it again, more times to like finish the movie. So
This is a lore I knew nothing about.
Dark Side of Oz, that's what they call it.
I love
That's
it.
a whole thing, yeah. And I don't know what year it. I mean, this is going back. I wonder if it was around before the 90s. I don't even know. I haven't researched it in a while, but
Yeah.
trying to think of
Yeah,
other
this is news to
films.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember going to the movies to see in the theater to see the original Ninja Turtles films.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
saw those. I
I
saw
like to go ahead.
the John Goodman Babe Ruth biography, Babe.
Mm-hmm.
I think they
Mm-hmm.
called it. I remember seeing that
Oh,
in the theater with my dad.
okay. Charlotte's Web. I'm going to throw that one out there.
Charlotte's Web.
Yeah. I
Um,
liked Bambi, but I was traumatized by the hunting scene.
oh,
Yeah.
and then the other ones, I don't know. Like I can't. I mean, The Wizard of Oz definitely is up there. Oh, I will mention too around the holiday time. Um, the 1930s Christmas Carol film.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever that would come on TV, I would always watch it every, December around that time. Always watch that older version. I love just the story
It
and,
is great.
it just really was like fun to see.
And I kind of I haven't watched it for a while, but I was sort of delighted, different as it was, by the Albert Finney Christmas Carol. And I think is it Bill Murray that has Scrooged,
Yes.
kind of a musical?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't come back to those much, but I kind of give them a little tip of the hat.
Yeah.
Uh, there was something that just came up and I forgot about it, but um I think I liked Little Women. I don't know how well that would, I mean, there's different versions of it
Yeah.
now. But that was kind of a cool thing, because Joe was a little plucky and, not so docile. And I might have related to that. I was kind of the girl who would sit in the back with the boys and tell stories and jokes and shoot spitwads and rubber bands. And I got a D in conduct one semester. And
Wow.
I was stood up in the corner, all the boys got stood up in the corner. And my music teacher, Mrs. Smedley, goes, "Oh, Estelle, I am so disappointed in you." And I was like, "Don't tell my parents."
Wow. Did you ever do, this is a random question, but did you ever do stand-up comedy over the years?
Not so much. I did take a a workshop or two, and it sort of has worked into my life. I was a little surprised, Tom and I do these live shows on TikTok and now Instagram. And on TikTok, 4 or 5 stand-up comics who, are not famous, but they go out and they work their clubs and stuff. And they were like, "You ever thought about stand-up? Because you should." And I went, "Dang, I think I will think about it now." So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I remember in this one stand-up comedy workshop, All I did was go back to the 70s and tell stories about this insane German Shepherd that my first husband and I had. The Thor story, Thor is his name. The Thor stories are out of this world. I mean, I don't have to do anything. I just have to tell them. And people go, "Oh my God, you have to go do something with those." So I'm delighted that I've had a life that has a lot of stories to it. I mean, I look back now and go, honey, you're lucky to be alive. But yeah, I do think about it and then I get busy with something. I go, oh yeah, stand-up comedy. And stuff comes to me, you know. And for what it's worth, there have been a bunch of fellas mostly that I've worked with who, you know, were in acting or ventured into acting. And you know, these little bon mots just occur to me and they go, can I steal that? And I'm like, steal away. Let me know how it goes.
I feel like everybody should do the like 5 minute comedy open mic stand up at least once, just to have that experience and maybe to have that moment too where they can really tell people what's on their mind or really say something they want to say to everyone in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a dear friend who's generally a poet, has been a writer for many years, although an actor as well. And they have ventured into, they're now transgender and they're doing transgender comedy and have never done anything like this. And they're doing, you know, they've had some real fun with it in San Francisco. And I'm like,
Wow.
I know, I know. So you, in their 70s. So you never know.
Do you ever think we'll have an Estelle feature film where it's like a biopic about your life? Do you ever think about those kinds of projects?
Not very often, but it's you know, I'm a Leo. So it's a tempting thought when it does cross my mind. Again, you know, I couldn't have predicted this with Taste the Biscuit and a few other things that are going on right now. So I go, well, you know, I'm not going to rule it out. I mean, I suppose it's a possibility. It would be interesting to see who played, you know, that character. I used to get, you look like Bernadette Peters back when I was young and my hair was very dark and very curly and my chin more pronounced. Uh, at certain points in my life, I looked like Sigourney Weaver's younger sister or sister. Um, and then for a while, I get like Linda Lavin, the gal who was Alice, as well as remember Macmillan and Wife? Okay, anyway. Um, Yeah, so you know, you kind of go, well, I don't know.
You mentioned Little Women earlier. There is a version with Elizabeth Taylor, and there's some family friendly movies, I guess considered old school family friendly movies with Elizabeth Taylor, and they're Lassie films. Have you seen any of those? This like The Courage of
Oh
Lassie,
no, I haven't.
Lassie Comes Home.
I think she's in National Velvet too, isn't she?
That's another Elizabeth Taylor and when she was a kid.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I know one. I kind of love the Black Beauty movies, almost any time period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think animal stuff is just like, oh, you know. But I have not seen. I've seen some of the Lappy episodes, the Lassie episodes. But I don't think I've seen any of the films. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. I would say start with Courage of Lassie.
Oh, I love the title.
That one was really cool. Lassie Comes Home's they kind of go a different direction with the story, but
Mm.
you probably would enjoy them both. And Elizabeth Taylor's great, and the supporting cast is also great too.
So she was a child actor still at that point, or teen
Yeah,
actor? Great.
yeah, quite young.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to say, or where people can follow your creative pursuits or keep up with you?
Well, I saw, I think it was something I'm gonna say share, um, who said, you know, do not give up on your dream. You just never know. Stick with it. Keep at it. do what you love, and you will be surprised at what happens, long term. So I would kind of say that because most of my life, had you told me what I'd be doing 6 months previous, I would have said, "What are you smoking?" Life can be very surprising, and if you can roll with it, usually in a good way. Um, but I am on social media, as is Vincent Gargiulo, as is Tom Shaw. We're all on Facebook. There is a Toasters and Moose fan page called We Tasted the Biscuit in 2022 on Facebook. And we're on Instagram and Twitter. I'm going to call it Twitter, or maybe I'll call it Twixter. Anyway, and also, of course, on TikTok, where it all kind of went bazoom.
And I want to say
On
that the
things like,
movie, I want to say the movie Chickens in the Shadows,
yes, on
that's on
YouTube.
YouTube, right?
Yes, it's free. It's 1 hour. It's on YouTube. All you have to do is, basically Google it and you'll find the scene for Taste the Biscuit. And on Vincent Gargiulo's page, there's subsequent videos that we've done with him, kind of in the Toasters and Moose story arc. So there was like I'm Not Homeless, which was like the year after the year it came out. I think there's a couple of others, but there's definitely one we did like in 2019. And I love Vincent's breathless narration where he's got this long sentence and runs out of air. And he's like, "Welcome to the 10-year reunion of the 30-year reunion performed in Hacienda Mobile Home Park," kind of on purpose, I think. But that's sort of, Toasters and Moose later on. And it's possible that this project at the end of the month that we may be doing may be an addition, in a sense, a progression of their storyline and story arc. So that's pretty fun. Yeah, and he's done a lot of other stuff, and you'll find that on his page too. He has a band, and Tom is a wonderful pianist with his own jazz trio in San Francisco. He accompanies all these different singers, performers, shows. So, and it looks like I might be in, a theater friend is writing a kind of pilot for a sort of supernatural show out in the desert. And so it looks, they have a couple parts that are pretty interesting. And you never know where those things can go. So, especially these days. I think that's one of the fascinating things about the media is that it has changed the game plan for a lot of industries. Some, to the detriment, and in other ways, it's just opened up possibilities if you can figure it out, and have a little imagination and are persistent. You kind of go, we can still make this happen. We don't need that big studio or this or that or the other. So
Maybe I can have you and Tom back on an episode in the future on the podcast. If there's a movie, maybe from the list from the films from the other
yeah,
films you picked in addition to The Miracle Worker, maybe there's a
yeah,
movie Tom saw as a kid or younger person that he would enjoy talking about.
I would love that. It's funny because we didn't realize it at the time, and we've mentioned this in a couple interviews where once we got cast, and it was 2009, so the internet was a little different back then. So when I found out that Tom Shaw would be playing Moose, I Googled him. I went, "He's a pianist. He's got his own trio. He's a real musician." And I was confident acting, but not singing, even though I enjoy it. Yeah, I was terrified during filming, terrified. And then he Googled me and went, "She's done Shakespeare. She's a director. She's a teacher, blah, blah, blah. I can't act in front of her." And so, once we confessed that, we were like, "Girl, I got your back. But we didn't realize the chemistry, especially for us personally as performers, till we started, doing the Toasters and Moose stuff in the last 2 years and the live shows. And people were like, "How are you not a couple?" I go, "We're a couple of what?" But I was like, "We're best friends." And that may be why we get along because we're not a couple. But he has his lifestyle, I got mine. And I think each of us are able to cover and back each other in ways where we're not strong. So together we're kind of like, it works. But I would love to do that. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
For any casting directors or Hollywood directors, are there any certain kinds of roles that you would love to perform
Oh God.
with, or that you would just feel like you were made for a certain role if anybody's looking to cast you in something?
Wow. I would still like to come back. I played it in my 40s. And however, what was on, the media camera on stage, and I can think of some wonderful people to play opposite. I would love to come back to Eleanor, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine in The Lion in Winter. I got to do that, couple, three decades ago. Um, and the language in that is just beautiful, and the characters are visceral. And she was an amazing, amazing historical figure. She lived to 82 at a time when people died in their 40s. Even Henry II lived till 55. But she went to the Crusades twice. I'm not going to go on and on about it. But and she instituted all kinds of stuff. And you just go. And I've gotten to play Prospero in The Tempest. I wouldn't mind going back to that. I got to play Nancy Wake, who I'd never heard of, and most of us haven't. She was one of many women who were resistance fighters during World War II. She was a young Australian woman who went to Europe, kind of crash course journalism, saw how the Jews were being treated in Europe, and thought, I've got to do something about this. And she fell in love with a French businessman. They got married. He helped her do all that. She was so good. Her name was Nancy Wake. Her code name was Madame Andre, and that was the title of the play. But she was so good that Hitler and the rest of the Nazis referred to her as the White Mouse. She was that elusive. And her story goes on. It's amazing what she did. So stuff like that, I go, whoa, yeah. Um, I'll have to think about that in terms of roles. There are people I would love to work with. Absolutely. And actors I would love to work with, whether I directed them or acted with them.
Do you have a lot of like original screenplays or plays that you've written?
I don't have a lot, but I did write some stuff during pandemic. A bit of it was kind of what I'll call, it's not quite fan fiction, but I got hooked into, of all things, Yellowstone, and primarily because of the actors in it. But it was interesting because the creator had been a pretty good actor, and he transitioned into writing. And I saw a couple of interviews with him, and I was fascinated by how that arose in him. And at the time, I also saw a quote by Mindy Kaling who said, if you don't see a part out there for you, write it. So unconsciously, I'm writing this kind of fan screenplay for, an episode or episode, storyline that could be continued. And I particularly admired Gil Birmingham, Kevin Costner, and some of the other actors are just marvelous. But then in the writing of this, I realized I had written a hell of a part for myself, quite unconsciously. And I went, oh, Estelle. So, and I have some other stuff too that I, started and I want to go back to. Uh, that surprised me. And what really surprised me is I was sitting on my porch and scene after scene would just come to me. And I'm like, and it's all still here, even after writing it down. But once in a while, I'd be imagining, and then the scene would kind of go, to a crappy ending. And at first, I was like, "Oh no!" And then I went, "Wait a minute! It's like acting. Go back to the starting point. Let's see how it goes this time." And it was great. Wow, life! I didn't expect that. I
Wow.
know. May
Could
sound
you
corny, but anyway.
could you repeat that quote again? You said if there's not a
Oh yeah,
role.
yeah. If you don't see a role out there for you, write it.
That's a good spot, I think, to conclude. I'll let you enjoy the rest of your evening here.
This has been very enjoyable, Jeff. Thank you
Oh, I'd
so
love to have you
much.
back. We'll be in touch.
Good, good. I've really enjoyed this.
And yeah, thank you again, Estelle. It's been really fun, and I appreciate all your stories and insights.
Well, great. Yeah, let's pick another movie. This was a great one. It
And
brought a lot.
ask Tom too. Maybe you guys both. There's a particular film that you both are fond of.
Yeah, and then we can
Like,
really,
yeah, that'd be
click
fun.
on. Yeah, great
All right,
idea.
I'll stop recording and let you go.
Oh, all right, if you must.
Have a good night. Thanks.